Hi, I'm making bread today. It's super easy. This recipe you actually should genuinely follow because it's super easy. The recipe is super old. It's my mom's from Epicurious, but it's super simple to follow. It makes a really, really nice bread and it is so uncomplicated. The only things you need are warm water, yeast, some oats, like just quick cook, like the regular oats that you would normally get, honey, vegetable oil, salt, and flour. You need like no actual equipment except an oven. It's super good. So the first thing you need to do is the yeast and the water. The yeast has to get warmed up before it can do anything else. This is a no-knead bread, but it still needs to prove. So I'm gonna put
so much.
a tablespoon, question mark, of yeast into 1/4 of a cup of water. I'm gonna stir it with my finger. Wash your hands, especially during the coronavirus. Wash your hands.
Did you wash your hands?
I washed my hands. My hands are washed. So that's just gonna start growing. It'll foam up. So step 1, grow some yeast. Let it sit for 10 minutes. And then we'll move to step 2. Jump cut, it's been 10 minutes. We've dissolved the yeast in some warm water. Again, for the record, people who haven't worked with yeast before, when they say warm water, they mean like hot tub temperature. So like it should be comfortable to have your hands in the water, but it should feel warm, not hot, not too cold. Anyway, the yeast is dissolved. In some breads, most breads, you'd have some sugar in there for the yeast to eat. But in this function, for this bread, because it's a no-knead bread, you don't have to like knead it. There's no need
to knead.
There's no need to give it food. That was just to sort of dissolve the yeast. There is sugar in this recipe. It's a slightly sweet bread. But anyway, so this goes in the bowl.
Pat the baby.
Smack that ass. That goes in the bowl, along with another 1.5 cups of water, warm again.
2 shots of vodka.
2 shots of vodka. No vodka in this, please don't do that. It will kill the yeast. You add 3 tablespoons of, it says natural oil. It's just like canola oil, any oil. I'm sure olive oil would be okay, but it has a bit of a flavor. So canola oil. So 3 tablespoons. That's around about 3 tablespoons. You can measure if you would like. A bit of salt. That much salt. 2.5 teaspoons, technically. And then you're gonna want 1/3 cup of honey. You can measure that. I have some mostly empty bears and a full bear, so I'm gonna just kind of, this part's gonna take a second. So that's about 1/3 cup. It'll give it a sugary taste, like a little bit of a sweeter bread. It's not super sweet, but it'll give it like a little bit of a sweeter taste, but it also feeds the yeast. 3/4 cup of oats. So this is a 1/3 cup measure. So for 3/4, you do 2/3, and then like a little extra. Math. And just stir all that together. Again, this has the yeast, water, honey, oats, a little bit of salt. You kind of want to blend this first. Super exciting, but that's all that is. And then we're gonna add flour. Wheat flour absorbs more water than white flour. I don't know why you would want to make this recipe whole wheat, but if you did want to, because you're trying to be healthy, you would do about 3 cups of flour because the wheat absorbs more water. However, I want it to taste really good, so I'm just gonna use white flour, and that's about 5 cups-ish. So my bowl may be too small. It's really just add an amount of flour until it feels right. So that's 3, that's 4. And then I'm just gonna start to stir this in. I'm sorry if you can hear the boys in the background. Wheat is things with grain, that when you work it a bunch, it starts to form more gluten, which is what gives bread stretch, but it also makes it like chewy. So like things like pizza crust has a lot of gluten in it. And you form that by kneading the absolute hell out of it so that it's really stretchy and chewy. But that's not necessarily something we want from this bread because we want it to be really nice and soft and tender. So minimal mixing. That was 4 cups, but I feel pretty good about this. So I might wait to do the 5th. I'm gonna knead this or just work it gently by hand a little bit, just to see if this is actually where I want it to be. And if for some reason you add too much flour, you can just add a little more water to it. I like this. It's not, there's like an extra cup of flour that's not in there, but I don't want to add more flour because I feel like that would make it too stiff. So this is part of dough. This is part of bread making, is dirty hands. That's why you want to wash your hands for sure. So we've got this here. We're not going to knead it. If you were making a bread that was to be kneaded, this is the stage. You would put it out onto a flour countertop and knead it, but this is real tender bread, so we're not going to do that. So I'm going to transfer this into a lightly oiled bowl so it can start to prove. Cover it in plastic wrap. Cloth. 1 hour. It's gonna go. I put it outside. It's got a little cloth covering it. It's a little bit warmer outside, so the yeast will grow a little faster. 1 hour. Okay. So it's been an hour. She is Rosen. Flour. This is a bench scraper. You can use other things. I like using a bench scraper. I think this is my great grandpa's. From his restaurant.
Yep.
So. Duh. No kneading. So I'm just gonna cut it into bits. Kinda like same size-ish. I'm just gonna do, that one is too small. So I'll just squish that. But just, you know, I didn't count. So I guess it makes 12 buns. So I'm gonna make these into loaf shapes. This bread, you can tell that there's not a lot of gluten development because when I poke it, it stays. If I had developed the gluten, it would have been springy, so when I poke it, it would have kind of like come back up. But it's not. We're getting these little buns on there. I didn't grease this. I'm hoping that's fine. But I'm gonna place these guys with a pretty, like 2 or 3 inches apart because they still are going to rise again. They've already risen once, but they have to prove. We're gonna cover it again. Plastic wrap and then another like dishcloth. And then it's gonna rise second time. Proof. this. It's okay if the cloth is really old and has a hole in it.
The energy in the studio today is really something.
20 minutes. 20 minutes. It's been 20 minutes. We've got some rustic little buns. This is the other batch of rustic little buns. You'll notice they're irregular. They taste fine either way. Never use that. This is egg wash. I'm gonna put it on top. That's not necessary. It gives it like a prettier look in the end result. It makes it brown nicer, but it doesn't really affect the flavor or the texture much. So if you don't want to waste an egg, although obviously you just save what you didn't use and like cook it for breakfast tomorrow. But if you don't want to use the egg, you certainly don't have to. The only difference is it would look a little bit different when it came out, so the egg lets it kind of become a little bit of a golden brown. So this recipe calls for loaves, but I'm making buns. So the cook time will not be 40 minutes. However, it'll just be when they're done. I'm just gonna test it by feeling it. But yeah, you could also make this in a loaf pan. It's less common for people to have loaf pans, so even though we have one, buns are buns. These are going in the oven. It'll bake for up to 40 minutes, but I'm not sure how long. I'll see you in a bit. Yeah.
Do you want to do a
I
jump
know,
cut
turn
out?
off. These are the rolls. They're all a little different, that's fine, but they're still pretty hot. But you could tell if they're cooked by if they have a kind of hollow sound, but that's what they look like. I'm gonna cut the littlest one open. There you go. Little rustic rolls. Good for sandwiches. They taste good. Bye guys.